Everyone. Hi guys. Hello audience. We obviously can't see you, but we know we've got quite a big audience today. I think we had 101 at the last count, which is amazing. It's so nice to see so many people being interested in this webinar. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself. I'll introduce our panelists today. If you see me looking down at my hands, I do have some prompts written down, and I'm not just being slightly odd. Just a bit of an aid memoir. So just to introduce myself, I'm Victoria Moffat. I'm a former lawyer, and I'm the founder and managing director of LexRex Communications. LexRex Communications is a PR, communications and marketing consultancy for the legal sector, as you would probably expect. And today we're running this event with Chambers and Partners for the second year running. Last year it was an event in real life. Obviously we couldn't do that again this year. But one of the benefits of that is that we've been able to open it to a much wider audience. And obviously there's an appetite for it because there's so many of you who've come along today. So without further ado, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Do you want to go first, Simon?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Simon Christian. I'm the editor of Chambers High Net Worth, which is Chambers and Partners' guide to the private client world, both the law and some other areas as well. I started as a deputy editor on Chambers UK. Sorry, before that I was a researcher on Chambers UK, and then I was a deputy editor on Chambers UK before founding the High Net Worth Guide about 5 years ago.
Thank you. And Katie, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the UK deputy editors. I formerly worked for the Chambers Europe Guide, and yeah, I cover the clinical negligence, financial crime, product liability, professional negligence, real estate litigation, court of protection, and gaming and licensing sections.
Fantastic, thank you. And James?
Hi there, I'm James Roberts. So I graduated from Warwick with a law degree a few years ago, and then I joined Chambers and Partners as a researcher on the UK team 4.5 years ago. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been a deputy editor on this team. And some of the areas I'm responsible for are energy projects, construction, telecommunications, healthcare, education, and charities.
Fab. So we've got a really nice spread of sort of specialisms today, which I think could be really handy for the audience. So just really quickly in terms of how this is going to work. Obviously we've got an hour, and I will sort of be asking the questions that I think and hope and understand are likely to be of interest for our audiences today. Obviously I've got a lot of experience of drafting Chambers submissions and Legal 500 submissions as well. I'm sorry if we don't say that, that's a swear word in this room today. But you know, I think realistically, the vast majority of people putting in for Chambers will want to at the same time be putting in for whatever the equivalent area is, you know, for Legal 500. And I think you would accept that is generally the case. Just a little bit of house admin. Obviously there's going to be no fire alarm, well, hopefully not here anyway, so we don't have to talk about anything like that. But at the end of the seminar, if it works, which I think it usually does, when you close off Zoom, you should automatically be taken to a Google document where we would be really grateful if you could sort of record your feedback, because obviously feedback helps us to improve these sorts of events. So if you could possibly do that, I would be most grateful. Just another thing to really quickly mention is we after the event we'll be sending out a series of emails, not sales emails, but kind of helpful emails. We're calling it the Directories Bulletin, and it's basically a series of sort of deadline reminders, information, top tips, videos, interviews, all this sort of content that will hopefully sort of guide you and help you through the submissions process, because you know we realise how stressful and hard work it can be, whether you're managing one submission or kind of 90. I know some of the bigger firms just have loads of them. Goes without saying that it is GDPR compliant, so if you don't want to receive any of this super helpful information, and I've no idea why you wouldn't want to receive it, but it's fine. And obviously you can unsubscribe really easily. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now, and because I know you don't really want to hear from me, you want to hear from these guys. So what makes a really strong submission?
Shall I start on that question? And my perspective as a person who's covering the private client market is going to be slightly different from James and Katie's, just because of the nature of the work. But I think it kind of applies across all of them. I think the best submissions are ones that give us the best understanding of the practice as a whole. You know, your practice, what makes it interesting, what makes it different, what are you good at, you know, what are your areas of focus. And I think people sometimes worry a little bit too much about what I would sort of call writing to the marking scheme, as if there's like a perfect series of words that you can do that kind of makes you automatically get a really good rating, which isn't really the case. I think my kind of key point that I always say to everyone is, you know, it's not a sort of an exam with a secret marking scheme that, you know, that you're trying to fulfill. We do have things that we're looking for, but what we're really looking for is a sense of you and your practice.
Do you guys have anything to add to that?
James?
Yeah, I guess obviously good work makes a good submission, but beyond that, it's sort of about how it is presented on the document, and that goes down to things such as being concise. And I think a work highlight that is presented as a series of 4 meaty paragraphs kind of leads to some information perhaps being lost by the research. It's a sort of the key information that you really want to get across. So I would say being concise is an important thing, and consistent as well. I think some things that we can see is lawyers, some of the key lawyers in the department being really touted as the people to look out for, and then that not being followed up by seeing these names appearing on work highlights. And in doing so, that disadvantages the lawyer and by extension, the firm itself. We want to see that, you know, on top of seeing the wording that says this is a lawyer who's got good standing in the market, we'd like to see the work as well being followed up on. So essentially, it's just about how that is presented, and as long as it's being kept concise and clear and not an excessive legal language that makes the key points hard to take away, then that's what's going to make for a good submission generally.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. So by the sounds of it, the case studies are obviously important, the work highlights, sorry. But is it sometimes the case that firms perhaps underuse the other sections, you know, they sort of talk about your team or talk about your individuals? You know, do you want to see more information sometimes there? Obviously still concise and to the point, but is that do those sections provide an opportunity for you to really get under the skin of the firm?
Yeah, I would say so. Especially there's a section we have just before we get to the work highlights, where we invite firms to comment on their thoughts on their own firms, standing in our rankings and the wider market. And we do see a lot of firms that say, you know, we'll be happy to discuss this interview. And while, you know, there's no reason why you can't put that as an answer, you know, putting that does not lead to us being more likely to interview. The process of deciding which firms we're going to interview is based on separate criteria. So what I would say is it is always nice when we see this information. It doesn't just go hidden and unlooked at. And we do see, for example, if it has been updated year on year in submissions, we do check past submissions as well. So when we see that's been engaged with, you know, we realize that's useful information and we do take that on board. And then similarly, when it comes to a summary of each individual lawyer that you're really looking to put forward, by being very clear about what exactly it is that you believe makes this lawyer suitable for a ranking, in terms of what key work they've handled, what their focus is on the market, key clients, things such as that, provided in a summary that isn't excessively long, that is always going to help, because, you know, we'll be getting information on these lawyers from lawyer interviews, from interviews with other people in the market and clients, and even just look at the work highlights, but to see that backed up in a nice, concise way in terms of the summary, that is always going to help, absolutely.
That's really useful. And actually, you've just referred to a criteria for firms to be interviewed. Is that something that you make available, or is that sort of just an internal kind of set of criteria?
In terms of that, I think we do mention something on the website, but just to state it here, We generally will look to do a cross section of the market. We don't interview everyone. It's just not feasible and possible with how we operate. And it's generally not useful. It's better to sort of, we try to target sorts of areas. So if you imagine there's 4 firms, 4 different bands of firms in a section, we'd like the section of that. We'll talk to different firms from different bands, and then equally some that aren't in the rankings, and try and get some alternative perspectives as well. And likewise, we don't just interview the same firms again and again. We do like to try and mix it up year on year, because we don't want to run into sort of like the area where we're just talking to the same firms and getting the same opinions. We like to sort of branch out and make sure that we're getting the full picture from the market year on year.
Yeah.
So those are key things in terms of, and those will be decided before research begins, generally in about the month or so beforehand. So that's generally how it works.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. So the logic there really then is, when it comes to filling out those sections, don't just assume that because you had an interview last year, you'll get an interview again this year. You know, it's a missed opportunity, isn't it? If you literally just, right, we can talk about this in an interview, because you've missed that chance then if you're not getting interviewed this year. Okay, no, that's really helpful. Katie, what's more important? Is it the submission, or is it the referee spreadsheet, or are they equally weighted?
Well, really they are equally weighted. Although I would say that with the referee spreadsheets, they are really critical in terms of our research and getting that process started, so that we can talk to your clients, we can talk to people that you've been working with, and then we can, you know, not verify your submission, but make sure that it aligns, and that everybody's happy with the work that you've been doing. And with the submission, something that I just wanted to add from before, yes, be concise, but also make sure that it's easily understandable for people who may not have a legal background, which is something that we run into from time to time, that the work highlights are really quite technical, even if they're concise. So just another tip to be aware of in terms of the submission document itself.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think if you offered me the option of, I can only have your list of referees, or I can only have your text submission, I would pick a really good list of referees who can tell us really useful things about your practice. That said, you know, that's kind of a false choice, really, because the best submission taken as a whole is going to be coherent. Each of the parts are going to be coherent with itself. So you talk about the summary versus the work highlights. Well, the best submission is going to have information in the summary section that's then backed up by relevant work in the highlights section, and then the text submission is hopefully going to be backed up by referees who can speak to the particular strengths that you're outlining. So if you're saying that you're really, really good at whatever derivative actions in a litigation submission, and then none of your referees have done a derivative action with you, well, that's not sort of lining up. Or if you say we are really, really good at such and such a type of regulatory law, and then there's no examples of regulatory law in the work list, well, that doesn't really make sense as a form. You're saying you're really good at something, and then you're offered the opportunity to provide evidence for it, and you haven't. So really they all kind of worked, on the best submissions, they're all going to work together to sort of reinforce the key points about a practice.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And we have had a question, actually, an anonymous question that came in before the event, which is specifically about referees. So I think we've probably seen this quite often, where you'll have a referee and it's a client that uses a firm perhaps for lots of different areas. So obviously the same referee is appearing across sort of multiple spreadsheets. How is that referee treated? Because I'm guessing in that scenario you might well also have various a variety of researchers across all of those different areas. So how is that dealt with? James, do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So obviously we will have referees who are not just a referee for one firm in this one area, or indeed several areas, but they may well be referees for other firms as well. And in those instances, when the research cycle begins, whichever research begins first, say, for example, a regional real estate section starting in January or February or what have you, that researcher will reach out to the referee, and they will cover all the different referrals that have been mentioned. And that will include, if it is other guides as well, they'll ask about all referrals from all the guides that are there at that time. This is one of the reasons why we say it's so much more important to have your referees come in on time than your submission documents, just because you can imagine a scenario where your referee spreadsheet comes in late, the referee is on that list, they also have to be on someone else's referee list, and then they have been contacted about Y law firm, but they would have been asked about your law firm, X law firm, but that information was not on our system because the referee didn't come in on time. So we will always make sure to ask multiple about all the referrals that are available to us at the time that the communication goes out. In instances where they don't get back to us immediately, because we have a research cycle of 4 to 5 months, they will generally, if they've been contacted early on, have an opportunity to be recontacted later on, and then have that extra chance to try and ask about the referees, all the firms, so they'd be the referee from a different section contacting them, and then asking again about all the referrals.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add on that is that sometimes people often kind of raise that issue of, oh, you know, what if this person is referred for multiple practice areas or referred for multiple different firms? And they sort of raise it as if it's a problem, when actually for us, that's a really good person that we really want to speak to. You know, if we can speak to one person and get information about 3 or 4 different departments in your firm, and maybe speak to them about 3 or 4 other firms that they've worked with as well, and get them to do that comparison exercise, that's a really useful person for us to speak to. So actually picking people who are sort of, you know, popular choices, if you like, can often work in your favor to an extent, because you get to see that comparison, and also it's potentially someone who we'll see as a trusted source because, well, look, they've worked with lots of different law firms, they know what they're talking about, they do a lot of legal work, so their comparative feedback is going to be quite well informed, compared to someone who, say, has only used one firm, and they say, well, you know, this one firm was good, but they've got no comparison, no base of comparison, if you know what I mean. So it's sometimes given to us as, you know, it's a problem. What if my person is on other people's lists? But actually, it can work to your advantage as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. So what was my next question? We've had a question just come in, which I think I'll ask now. And actually, people are asking questions in the form, which is great. What I'm going to say is, if the questions come in and they're kind of relevant to the points that we're talking about now, I'll ask them straight away. If it's something we're going to cover, I'll ask them later on, or I'll just incorporate them in my own questions. But there will also be 15 minutes at the end for questions as well, if there's anything that we've not kind of covered. So somebody's just asked, and I think we've already answered this, but I'm going to just double check with you. Should people be linking the referees back to the case studies? Now the answer is yes, isn't it? That's what you've just said, but just to clarify that.
Yeah, it's not essential. It's certainly not essential, and you don't necessarily have to make an explicit link either in the submission, you know, a specific link either in the submission or in the referee form to say, you know, this is the referee for such and such highlight. But it does help because, you know, if you're saying this is your best work, and then we've got people saying that you did a good job on it, then that's, you know, that's a useful story to hear. And if you'd been involved in a really important and interesting piece of work, you know, generally, you know, on a market level, but then there's nobody to sort of say, you know, we thought they did a good job on that piece of work, then that's a missed opportunity, I would say. I don't know whether you guys have a different view on that though. Generally speaking, I like to see it, albeit that I wouldn't ever say this has to be something that you do.
Yeah, for my part, I like to see it as well. I wouldn't say that every matter has to have a referee linked to it, because that's not always going to be possible, but definitely yeah, try, especially for the bigger deals or transactions, try and get the referee for those.
Okay. So even if you can only, you know, if you're putting in kind of confidential matters where you can't even identify the parties, obviously you're probably not going to be able to put referee details in for that, but if you've talked about the matter in detail, that's fine. But if you've got similar matters, I suppose, that again showcase that same type of experience and expertise, but it's not kind of confidential, then that's a great opportunity, isn't it, to showcase that actually, whilst one is confidential and can't be talked about, here's an example of another similar deal or in the same sector or whatever, and here we can provide, you know, somebody who can talk about that. Is that how you see it?
Pretty much, yes. And it's not, particularly in my area, it's quite rare that you'll be able to include, you know, particularly clients and people like that. But what we're looking for is evidence that what you say you are good at, you actually are good at.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting this. We, when we're sort of helping law firms with submissions, and I assume this is helpful to you. You've never come back and said, don't include these people, this is ridiculous. What we sometimes say to clients where the client themselves can't talk is, you know, are there other people, kind of professional advisors or third parties, and I suspect particularly for the high net worth guide, you know, it's often the clients won't want to talk about it themselves, so then you have to go to sort of third parties who perhaps work with the clients or have the same expertise but aren't clients themselves. You know, are those sort of contacts useful?
Yeah, I'll kind of I'll let the UK guide chaps answer separately, because for me on high net worth, this is pretty much vital.
Yeah.
It's fairly rare that we get clients, you know, end user lay client to speak to, just because of the privacy concerns involved in the nature of the work that we do. You know, most of what we do is, you know, estate planning or you know, sort of family law and things like that. And actually those third parties in my area of practice, you know, the practice area I cover, those third party advisors have usually got a better basis for comparison anyway, because it's fairly rare that individual lay clients will have extensive experience with more than one or two private client lawyers. You know, even if they're a business person that uses lawyers a lot in their business life, it's a very different relationship with your private client lawyer. And there's not many people who've got, you know, oh, I've worked with 3 or 4 different firms on private client law. So actually we kind of encourage people to use those third party advisors as referees. You know, anyone who's worked closely with you on an important matter, you know, so like a bank, an accountant or a tax advisor, a valuation specialist if you're doing a business sale, forensic accountants if you're doing anything litigation related, offshore trustees if you've got a client with offshore trusts, any of those people, investment managers, any of those kind of people.
Yeah, okay. Katie, what about the main guide?
Yeah, definitely. So I would second what Simon said there as well, particularly, so one of my sections is clinical negligence, so expert witnesses for clinical negligence, particularly on the claimant side, are really useful, because again, it's the people on the claimant side, the client there, they probably haven't had to instruct other solicitors before, so getting the expert witnesses on board who work with different firms is quite important as well. Yeah, James, do you have anything to add on?
I think I would just add that in general, it's always better to put as many of the full amount of 20 referees as you can in. And if it means that, we love to hear from clients. Clients are usually the best in terms of what they can tell us about the actual firm. They will give the best picture about their experience. And obviously, we're producing a guide at the end of the day. We're trying to inform people who are purchasing sort of legal services at the end of it, as it were. So they are often the best. Having said that, just to repeat what these guys have said, if you can't get them, and there are other sources that are useful, then definitely do fill in that full amount of 20 or as close as you can to that, because that is going to give your firm the best chance of getting good feedback for yourselves and your lawyers.
I suppose the difference is that where James talks about clients, I think generally what you mean is sort of general counsels at corporate clients, isn't it? Whereas for my guide and for Katie's Clin Neg sections as well, it's actually private individual, you know, that, like I say, the lay client, you know, the man on the street. or in my case, the very rich man on the street. So it's a bit different there.
Or woman,
and in the commercial sections, yeah, I think, you know, where you can choose clients, it's always better to choose a client. But for sort of other types of categories, then yeah, it's a slightly different position.
Perfect. No, that's great. I think we've just answered one of the other questions there in that point with regards to whether it's clients or third parties. So that's great. Somebody just asked a slight variation on this question actually around referees. Do you prefer clients or barristers? I'm assuming you prefer clients, but barristers are fine.
Yeah, and again, it depends, doesn't it? And in certain sections, because we do have concurrent bar research and solicitor research, when you talk to solicitors, they can give you good information about barristers. Barristers likewise can give a good information about a lot of solicitors, and likewise others in the market. So those can be some really good interviews that our researchers have with those sources. So I would never say we don't want to talk to those people. And often we'll be talking, even if they're not put forward as referees, we may be talking to them anyway, because we do our own research with lawyers in the market. So I would never say don't include these people. These can be very useful sources for us, but we do always sort of the clients, and when we can get them, I would say clients, absolutely. And then to supplement that with maybe some people who can offer some other perspective, I think it's probably fair to say.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody's asked this question, although they've not couched it in the same terms as me. What are your pet hates? And this is one for all of you, so I don't really mind who goes first.
Do you guys want to go first? I've got a few.
Yeah.
I have a list.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah. No. Mainly they have to do with just the language used. And Katie mentioned before about overuse of technical jargon. I'll let you kind of do that one, because I know a lot of the sections that you sort of oversee have got a lot of that. The other thing that we get quite a lot of is sort of overly narrative to the point where it's missing the point that this is a summary. When you're writing up the work examples, we need to know enough to understand the client and the nature of the work, but we don't need to know their life history. And sometimes you do get people who focus a bit too much on, what all of the client's children do. It doesn't really matter. If it's really relevant, if it's, eldest daughter is, involved in, have I gone on mute there? No, I haven't. Good. Is involved in charity work and, thus has more money in the estate or something like that to compensate. Fine, but just overly narrative is a bad thing. The other thing I really don't like is just overuse of really bland marketing terms that don't really mean anything. As a sort of, I think people feel the need to kind of use some of this stuff, and maybe a lot of it is driven by sort of other people other than the marketing team, to be honest. But I often find that so many firms, they fall back on the cliches of, what makes you distinctive? Well, it's our commitment to client service. Yes, you and every other law firm.
Yeah.
If there was a law firm that wasn't client focused, then what is it? Who is it focused on? Just stripping some of that stuff away. What makes us interesting is the interconnected nature of our global legal services. What does that mean? What does it mean for clients? And if what you're saying is, well, we're a big international firm and we can serve clients in multiple jurisdictions, so we're particularly strong on international work, then say that. Don't say, the same thing that every other firm is saying, and just remember that the researcher is reading dozens of these. And if it just falls into bland cliche or, sort of marketing speak, they won't switch off because it's their job to read it and analyze it, but you're just going to not get through in the same way as if you were direct and you focused on what's actually, what is actually good about your practice, rather than trying to pretend like it's something that it's not.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, what are your pet hates? Katie, what's your pet hates?
Yeah, going back to the matter descriptions, I can't say it enough, please be succinct and really easy to understand. As Simon just said, the researchers are going through so many, and when they're too technical, it uses up a lot of brain power. And of course, like, again, that's their job, they're going to do it, but the more that the information is easy to access, you know, it's just so much easier for everybody, really. And so there's quite a few that I'm thinking of at the moment.
I've got a list, Katie. So
yeah, I'm looking at mine and I'm just thinking, oh. Yeah, James, do you want to cover the matters, and then I'll come back to some of the research stuff in a moment.
Okay. Well, I was looking at some of the key ones. We canvassed the team for this just to make sure we're covering all the bases. I can speak from personal experience that from my time as a researcher, that what is not so helpful is having lawyers who are not prepared to engage fully with the process. And that means, as well as talking about their own firm, talking about the market. And it's, you know, when we do these lawyer calls, it's for two reasons. It's one, to find out more about firms offering in the area, but it is also to try and canvass them for their opinion on others. And I had one person as a researcher who said because he had positive opinions about everyone, but because some were more positive than others, it just wouldn't be fair to give any feedback. And so he refused, which didn't go down well. And we do have ways of keeping track of like how good certain interviews were. And so the people who are more inclined to help us and give us the information that helps our research, those are sometimes people we refer back to in following years and ask for an interview. So having these lawyers who are more prepared to help can be great. One thing that came up was surprising researchers on calls with either more lawyers than they expected to be talking to, or a different lawyer that they were expecting to talk to. And then you see the former more than the latter. And we generally ask to speak to one lawyer at a time, because often it can lead to repeated information and not being concise and getting through the information in a timely manner in these interviews if it's more than one person that the researcher is interviewing. So making sure that the calls are limited to the people that the researcher is expecting to talk to, that's a big one. One thing would be ensuring that there's accurate information on the timings of matters, because we've talked a lot about the summary of the work. One thing that I've seen a lot of in terms of that is a bugbear of mine is when the work just says ongoing, for example, and I do see that a lot, but the problem being if the wording is exactly the same as last year's, and last year it just said ongoing, and the year before it was the same wording, it just said ongoing, and then you start to wonder, is this really recent relevant work, or is it just sort of like, you know, something that's not particularly useful for gaining insight on their current practice? So I would usually say is either in the wording of the summary or in the bit where you summarize either the ongoing nature or when it concluded, just some information about, you know, exactly what the latest stage is, whether a deal, you know, negotiations began on this date, can be quite useful to have, or just anything really that's going to give us some indication that this work is not just seemingly been ongoing forever with no real updates or progress at all. So I guess that would be another one that I wanted to bring up.
That's just quickly, Katie, before you do yours, I just want to add on James's last point there. That's something that we see a lot because of the nature of the work that we cover, the private client work that we cover. Naturally, a lot of the relationships are long-term, and it's fine to keep including that work year after year. It's fine to include the same pieces of work, but just make it clear what you did since the last submission. You know, what were the last 12 months worth of work? You know, so that we know that you're not just kind of triple counting work that finished 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, that's something that we look for a lot as well.
And presumably, you know, if just because a client is retained, you know, just because you are available to them, if you're not actually working on their matter, if you've not actually worked on anything of theirs, any of their trusts or whatever for a year, don't include it. If, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And it's fine to continue mentioning that piece of work so long as if it's an ongoing piece of work, so long as you're making clear, you know, if it's a piece of litigation, you know, this year we had the case management conference, and we had this, that, and the other, you know, a few sort of early actions, you know, some stuff around a freezing order, whatever it was that you did in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
make that clear. You know, in the last 12 months, we have done X, Y, and Z on this piece of work. And that's really, really helpful. On the trust side, yes, exactly. If this is a really good client that you did a really good estate plan for 2 years ago, but all you did in the last 12 months was, you know, have a catch up, you know, build 5 to 10 hours of, you know, just checking to make sure everything was okay, and that's it. You know, just mention it in the case list. You know, we act for this person, but it's not a very, what you did in the last 12 months is not a very interesting piece of work. What you did 2 years ago was a very interesting piece of work, and
So
hopefully you included it then,
but not as a case study potentially. Yeah, that's what I would do if it was me. But yeah. Okay, Katie, did you have some more pet hates?
Yeah, so I would second James's about the number of lawyers in interview. I know at one point, to be fair, this was in Germany, but I ended up with 5 lawyers on the call, and it is a lot for a researcher when you get so many people, because everybody wants, and this is the issue, everybody wants to talk and everybody wants to tell you their side, but there is only one researcher who is typing furiously away trying to get down all of the information. And for them to be able to do that, it's so much easier with just one person. So that kind of leads on to another thing, when you kind of ask a bit too much of the researchers in terms of weekly response rate updates, like things like that, it is quite hard. Again, they're dealing with numerous firms, and it can be quite distracting and time consuming. So something that we do like to ask is that any queries that you have, if you can try and condense them into 1 or 2 emails that can be easily dealt with in one go, that is really, really helpful. Of course, we want you to get in touch, like we want to have that relationship with you, but it can be quite, again, time consuming. And something else I wanted to mention in terms of a new approach that we have on the UK team this year, we have, you know, we're trying to make sure that our rankings are inclusive, that they're really reflective of the market. And in that regard, we started a new approach this year in terms of our interviews, and we're trying to achieve a 50-50 gender split in the lawyers that we're speaking with in interview. And you know, we are trying to move beyond just talking to heads of department as well. So we're also trying to set up talks with associate level people, and you know, it's just making sure that we're getting that direct and, you know, fresh overview and insights of the market. So anything that you can do to help us on that side as well, that we would be really grateful for that too.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing that on the UK chapter of High Net Worth as well. So it's not, we cover 55, 56 countries. It's not necessarily possible in all of them, but we're going to be doing that in the UK, certainly the UK chapter of High Net Worth as well.
Right, I think that's a really, good initiative, and I'm glad you said you're not just interviewing partners, because we all know that kind of once we get to partner level, women aren't often as well represented. Not always, but sometimes. Cool, okie doke. I have got quite a few questions, but I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, so I'm going to try and make sure that my questions kind of cover broadly the questions that people have asked. So a couple of the questions that we've had in are around getting that first listing, and how it can seem like trying to climb Mount Everest. Do you have any tips around getting to that point? But I think also more specifically, what I've been asked is, how do you get across in the submission the kind of the firm's history? You know, what's got them to this point of putting this first, second or third submission? Because I really, and that's another point actually I think it's worth covering, around the fact that you don't tend to list, do you, at the first submission. So maybe we can ask one question around, you know, what do firms need to do to try to get that first submission? What do they need to do?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind in terms of for a first step, it would definitely be communication, and it's what Katie said. You know, we do like the communication to be concise and not have a new question every day or every week. But just it can save a lot of time in terms of making sure that you're submitting to the right area, you know, and that can be geographically, making sure that, because we do ask for, you know, at the moment, and we may look at that if remote working becomes more common in terms of, you know, the ramifications of COVID. Right now, what we do is we look at where lawyers are based and where that work is coming out of. And a lot of sections, we do have regional different hubs for Thames Valley or Northeast or whatever. So you need to make sure that you're making for the right area. And then in terms of practice areas, there are sometimes overlap between, you know, planning and environment, or professional negligence, professional discipline. And we do have different sections. And to make sure you're maximizing your opportunities and not wasting time, that early communication, having a look at our website and our definitions and communicating with us can really help you out, making sure that you're on the right foot from the get-go. Beyond that, like we talked about what's more important, referees or submissions. Often those referees is how you first get noticed in the first place. And if you can provide us with a good list of referees and you've checked with them first and made sure they're people who are going to have time to talk to our researchers, because, you know, otherwise if there's someone who's a great referee, but they haven't got time to engage with the process, and that's a wasted space on a limited number of cases on the spreadsheet for referees in the spreadsheet. So making sure that you're maximizing the opportunities for us to hear back from these referees, that is the best first step that I can imagine. And if we are seeing, when we look at the research we've gathered that year, that this is a firm that can, you know, get a lot of traction from referees or clients, or indeed from other sources, then we'll definitely highlight them as one to look closely at next year. And if they don't go in that first year, which, as you know, Victoria touched on, it is rare, it can happen, it is rarer though, then after that first step, that is what's going to help us get the further feedback and then inquire with market sources, and building up, hopefully just in the 2 years, is going to really get that first ranking. Those would be the most important steps early on, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And the point about communication with us is really, really key. So engage with us beforehand in the process and say, you know, this is who we are, this is what we do. Where would be the best place for us to put in a submission? Because it might be that, you know, your firm's got 6 or 7 different practice areas, but you're not sure which are the ones that, you know, you should be focusing on. You know, you might think, well, you know, should we put in for every single practice area, when, you know, realistically a couple of these practice areas are sort of service practices, and that, you know, that they might not be the sort of practice that we want to push forward for rankings. The other thing is that, yeah, it makes a huge difference if you've got, you know, if you're applying for the right area and the right location from the start. It seems like a simple thing, but it's can be a little bit tricky. You know, what we call practice areas doesn't always line up with what you call your practice area. So it can be a bit tricky knowing exactly how we cover a practice area as well. So, you know, if we cover it on a nationwide basis, then it is going to be trickier for, you know, firms that don't have a national reputation to get in. It's not impossible, but it is a bit trickier. Whereas if we cover it at a more local level, you are probably going to have a better chance. And then seeking feedback afterwards. We're trying to to spend a little bit less time doing direct rankings feedback at the moment, as in, you know, why am I band 2 not band 1, and all of that sort of thing, because it does take up a lot of dep eds and editors' time. But, you know, if you are a newish submitter and you just say, look, is there anything we could have done, you know, is there anything we could have done differently? Was there anything that you would have liked to have seen that you didn't see? Is there anything stopping our application from succeeding in the future? You know, it might take the team a little while to get back to you, especially if you're responding just after a guide launch. It might take you know, even a couple of weeks to get back to you, but, you know, we do try wherever we can to get back and say, you know, well, you know, it might just be, look, to be honest, you're not doing work at the level that we're looking for in this category, which can happen. And, you know, and the answer there is, you know, unfortunately, if what you're doing is not what we're looking for, then, you know, you're unlikely to succeed in the future. Or it might just be, look, you know, we got a little bit of information about you, but not quite enough. You know, you really got to persevere next time, because, you know, you're not far away. And that's something else I would say, just persevere. so long as you're on the right track. We do monitor firms' research responses from year to year. So, just because you didn't get in this year doesn't mean that you're definitely not going to get in next year. It does make sense to persevere so long as you're on a track towards getting included.
Yeah, and actually what I will say is, having had quite a lot of contact with the team, people do always come back. Like you say, it can take a week, it can take 2 weeks, but I've always found the research team to be and the editorial team to be very generous with their time. So,
good.
As long as you're happy to take those questions, and I think, like you said, Katie, if you do want to ask questions, try to perhaps do it in one email, perhaps 2 emails rather than an email every week. Then you will be able to build those relationships and sort of get some quite helpful, very helpful, in fact, feedback. And I think sometimes it can be as simple as we've not had, like you said, we've not had much response from your referee spreadsheet. In which case, the case studies themselves might be absolutely fine, and all you need to do then is just engage a bit more with your referees and explain, that somebody will be getting in touch and ask if they're going to be happy to do that. Sometimes it can be as simple as that, can't it?
Yeah, exactly. And building on what James just mentioned as well, in terms of who you're putting on the spreadsheet, the CEO of a company looks fantastic, but in reality, are they going to be able to get back to us? Or, we want to speak with the people that the lawyers were working with on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones that can give the right feedback. And yeah, that's what we're looking for. So.
Yeah, of course. Right, we're rapidly running out of time. I do have some more questions of my own, and then there's another question just coming that I'll take a look at in a moment. But I think it would be remiss of me not to obviously mention the massive, great, huge elephant in the room, which is COVID. Not literally in my room, I hope. But this has been an extraordinary year, hasn't it? It's just been really bizarre, and it looks like we're going back into some sort of lockdown or something. It's not going to be a great winter, I don't think. Have you guys, are you expecting fewer case studies as a result of COVID? Well, that's my first question. Are you expecting fewer case studies? And second of all, are you changing your kind of approach or methodology to deal with that if you're expecting it?
If I jump in quickly first, because I think my answer is a bit different to the other guys. Private client work is generally sort of non-cyclical. So we wouldn't necessarily expect fewer case studies in the private client category. Obviously, for firms that are, sort of very based around their local area and their local area's work, it might be that, you were locked down for a long time and you weren't getting new work coming in through the door. But will reviews, trust reviews, we've sort of anecdotally seen actually quite a big uptick, and it's kind of a morbid thing to say, so I don't want to dwell on it too long, but we have seen an uptick in people thinking now might be a good time to review my will. So from my perspective, less so, but I think the other guys probably have a different response.
Yeah, so I would say that's going to come down to practice area by practice area basis, really. For instance, going back to one of my sections, clinical negligence, I can imagine that there might be a few more cases this year going around.
Oh, yeah.
But for other sections, there might be less. But then if that's how the market is, that's how the market is, and we can take that into account across the board. Generally, if things are slower in the market, your firm probably isn't the only one that's been affected by that, and we know. So I wouldn't worry too much if you feel like you can't fill out the whole submission because of a general downturn.
Yeah, and then in terms of how we'll look at things in terms of if there is will we see reduced feedback and say, well, this is because of COVID. As Katie said, it will depend on the section. In terms of even this past year, we did have that appreciation that it may have impacted some of the not all aspects of our research, but some of it. And so we did have in the back of our minds in certain decisions, but again, it would depend case by case, section by section, and it's still research won't begin until early 2021. We'll have a look at what the picture's like then, and we'll make any relevant decisions about how we'll approach the research close to the time, because at the moment it's very uncertain. But it is fair to say, in terms of amounts of work we're seeing on submissions, it will depend on a submission by sort of section by section basis.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. Okie dokie, so I just have a few quick questions. I think about 5 more minutes. So, quick questions. Any updates to the forms this year?
Not for this year's one. Depending on when you did your last high net worth one, you might have it might be a new form, but it's the same one as it was for the last UK cycle. That's right, isn't it, guys?
I believe so, yeah. And even in the last cycle, if you hadn't used the most recent template, I think there was guidance on the website that says continue, that's fine. We're not expecting any changes for the submissions we're taking in for the next guide, the 2 guide. And even if there were a last minute change, it shouldn't negatively impact you. You would probably, I won't commit to this in writing, but you'd probably be fine to just submit in whichever form the document was already in.
Okay. Next question. Somebody's asked, are you looking at introducing any sector-focused listings?
In terms of because we do have sector listings already in terms of like energy or telecommunications versus sort
new ones, I think. Any new ones?
We're always looking at whether we should be introducing new sections. What's more common right now is having a look at new subsections. You know, I'm having a look at whether I'm going to change my energy rankings to reflect changes towards a more renewable and focus. We already have renewable, of course, but whether we should introduce that and merge it with conventional power. There's never a time where we're just resting on our laurels and saying this is how it is, this is how it should be, and we'll just continue that. And likewise, we're always looking at whether there are any emerging areas. You know, I have telecommunications in one of my sections, and I'm having to see whether there's a possibility for a space law subsection in addition, which sounds great, and I'd love to be in charge of space law. But we'll see whether I can make it happen. But in terms of, you know, while we wouldn't commit to saying this is what we're absolutely bringing in now, X, Y, and Z, I would just say that we're always looking. And if there are any particular areas that you think we're not currently covering and there is a really good market for us, and again, communication's key, and you're always welcome to let us know, and we'll definitely look into it.
Yeah. Okay, so it's good feedback for you, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Katie, were you going to say something then?
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah, it is like we always want to hear if there's any way we can do better or any new areas that would, well, within reason make sense, then yeah, we'd like to hear about it.
Fab, okie doke. Going back to referees briefly with this question, is it good or bad, or does it depend on the circumstances if firms use the same referees each year?
Neutral, I would say. It depends on the referee. If it's the same referee that last worked with you actively in 2015 and you've been using them for 5 years as a referee when they haven't done any work with you, then that's bad. If they are a really active client who's doing new projects or continuing to work on existing files with you year after year, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, it's kind of obvious that one, I suppose, when you yeah, it goes back to that point, doesn't it, of sorry, I'm not saying the answer's obvious. What I mean is, it just comes back to that point, doesn't it, of relevance? But
it's, yeah, I think the question is probably asking, is there any kind of like penalty for using the same people time and time and time again? No, so long as they're giving us new information each time we speak to them.
Yeah. Okay. And is there, you know, do you like to see kind of a minimum number of referees or a maximum even, I suppose?
Well, the maximum's 20 across all guides and sections. Minimum, there's no minimum. If you want to give one, that's absolutely fine. But you've got the option of 20. So,
yeah. So yeah. I would just add that, you know, we do sometimes have firms that do try and, you know, push that. And if firms do provide more referees, and we take it at discretion of the researcher, and sometimes they'll reach out to the firm and say, you've submitted too many, would you like to revise this down? Because if the firm doesn't revise it down, then we will. And we're not going to contact more than 20. And we'll just take a random cross-section of the excess. And then if one of your great referees happens to be cut for that reason, then that just comes down to the fact that you've put too many referees forward. So do make sure it's got more.
So don't cheat the system.
Exactly.
You can't cheat the system.
You cannot cheat the system. So this is quite an interesting question. This is slightly strategic question, I suppose. Any top tips for kind of putting together effective highlights that the partners are saying have to be confidential, so they have to be confidential? You know, is there any way of kind of making them shine and stand out? Obviously, you can't speak to them, you don't know who they are. You might not know who they are, you might be able to guess, or it might be one that's confidential but named, or it might be completely anonymous. You know,
Yeah, this one comes up a lot in high net worth research, so I hope you guys don't mind if I jump in first. First off, I would say it's fine to have an anonymous highlight in our guide. I think that's okay in UK guide as well, although I think you'd probably expect to see that less often than we do. It's fine to have an anonymous one, but just give us enough detail about the client so we can understand the work. So, you know, call them ABC or, you know, something like that, like it's an anonymized piece of litigation, but give us, you know, a businesswoman in her mid-60s with 2 adult children who's looking to retire or something like that, just to give us enough detail, and then focus on the work that you did rather than anything that's going to potentially breach confidentiality. You know, we did a comprehensive estate plan for a client with complex business interests, you know, and a difficult situation with extended family, something like that, that focuses on the tasks and how you solve the problems rather than anything that might breach a confidentiality question.
Okay, no, that's helpful. We're very rapidly running out of time. I think we'll probably sort of stop the questions at 58 past, so we might have one more. We'll have time for one more. This is a nice one to finish on. Do you rank firms that don't put in submissions and referees?
We do. It can be harder, of course. You know, we have submissions and referees for a reason, but especially if a firm has gained some traction in the market because of lateral hires or some other reason, then generally that will come up in our research, even if that firm hasn't put themselves forward. And we're not going to penalise a firm just for not putting themselves forward, but obviously if they're not putting their best foot forward, as it were, so it is a bit harder.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Okay, I think we should probably stop with the questions now. I just obviously want to say on behalf of the audience, thank you. Thank you, obviously, to you guys, to James, Casey and Simon. Also, we've had a lot of law societies get involved this time around, and they've kindly shared the details of this session to their members. These are just the law societies that sent us their logos, and also a couple of businesses. So Simon McCrum and McCrum Consulting sent us sort of 25 people. Martin from Legal RSS, again, sent quite a few people. There were others who helped, but we've not had the logos in time, so apologies if your logo isn't there and you sent people to us. I really, really hope that you found the session useful today. I'm conscious we didn't get to around 2 or 3 questions, so no issues at all if you want to drop me an email with those questions, and then I'm sure I can probably speak to you guys if that's okay, and possibly look to get some answers from you. If you could fill in the feedback form once we've finished, that would be absolutely fantastic. And then just really, really quickly in this last minute, I just wanted to mention our LexRex toolkit, which is a brand new product. It isn't endorsed by Chambers. Chambers can't endorse this sort of thing. But essentially it's a toolkit of guides, templates, videos, help sheets, planners. You know, basically it's the LexRex expertise put into a toolkit. We've put this together to try and help firms, you know, with their submissions, because we understand, you know, it's a difficult process, it's time consuming, and it's just hard work basically. So if anybody feels like they need any help with their submissions, with deciding which ones to put in, or if they want to kind of do it themselves with a bit of support from our toolkit, or even if they you know, have done the work and want us to review it and give our expert feedback, then they're all services that we offer, and please do feel free to get in touch. But yeah, just to say again, thanks to you guys. Did you have any kind of closing comments before we sign off?
No, just none from me anyway. Just thank you for having us, and yeah, we're happy to answer anyone's questions if they want to ask us after the session as well.
Absolutely. I did just see one quick query about when the submission deadline is. It's not set in stone yet, but you can rest assured it's not going to be any earlier than it was last year. So I mean, it might well be a bit later, but there'll be an announcement when it's actually announced.
yeah, it's always on the website, isn't it? And obviously, I think from our point of view, we will try and send out emails, you know, once those deadlines become public. But yeah, no, thanks again, and we'll sign off for now. But yeah, great session. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.